Start, Adrian. Well, first of all, everyone, please give Adrian a hand. Well, let's start with this drawing, which has become pretty iconic. I mean, it's iconic enough to be on the cover of the book. And it was your first cover for the New Yorker, right?
Yeah.
So you talk a little bit in the end material of the book about the process of making this cover and how hard it was for Francois Mouly, the art editor of the New Yorker, to convince you to even try a cover.
Yeah.
Can you talk about how that happened?
I'm a terrible illustrator, not a professional illustrator. You know, I should have been like putting the pressure on her, like get my art on the cover or something like that. But it never would have happened if she hadn't really kind of, you know, kept in contact with me. And then I think she kind of gave me an invitation to sort of like submit ideas, and they have a calendar of different themes, kind of different issues and everything. And finally, she just said, like, I think you'd be right for this upcoming issue. It was like the books issue or the fiction issue or something like that. And she said, here's the deadline. Here's what I need you to do. And she just gave me like all the instructions I needed, basically. And I said, like, that's an assignment. That's an official assignment.
And to what extent had you dealt with her before at the New Yorker? You had a separate editor for your spot illustration.
Right. She mainly handles covers. So I was up until that point only doing interior illustrations, and I was mostly working with the first job I got in New Yorker was I got it from an art director named Chris Curry, and then after that I worked for a while with a guy named Owen Phillips. And they were exclusively doing kind of stuff inside the magazine. So when I did that cover, that was, I knew Francois a little bit, but that was the first time I ever worked with her in that capacity.
You talked a little bit about the advice that she gave you was that a good cover needs to contain within it the kernel of the story. It can't be just a gag.
I wonder if she's not here. I was going to ask her about that. Because I don't know if that's the overall assignment she gives to every artist, because there are certain New Yorker covers that don't really have any kind of joke to it. They're just like a nice painting.
Right, they're decorative.
Decorative, yeah. Very beautiful, or evocative of the season or something like that. But I think maybe just because she came to know me as a cartoonist, that she sort of pushed me towards not so much gags, but sort of embedding just a little bit of a narrative or some sort of idea into it beyond just a pretty picture. And that's sort of what I've stuck with. It's not really not my style to come up with like a very lit kind of topical cartoon, which he's so good at. So, but there always has to be some little idea. The few times I've just submitted like, it's, you know, autumn is coming, so here's some pretty leaves falling, and she's like, doesn't it? You know, it's just like sort of moving along now.
Right. Well, they have people who can do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Wayne Tebow usually does the food issue. It's a nice painting of some food.
I mean, I think that she was right to try and draw that out of you, because I think that most people who read you regularly would agree that that's a strength of your cartooning, is finding ways to create tension within a narrative tension within a single image, within a panel.
It makes it hard. Most of my illustration work that I've done previously was sort of not mindless, but it was not the part of my brain that involved telling stories or writing or anything. It was just sort of like, it's more of like being a designer or something, and thinking about color combinations or composition or something. So once I started doing these covers, it was a whole, it's the illustration assignment that takes me the longest, for sure.
Can you take us through, just for a minute or two, what the actual process of creating this particular piece was?
Just that I knew I had to do something with books. That was the extent of what Francois told me. And I'm trying to think. I think I did about 5 different sketches that all sort of pertain to that idea. Some of them were a little more jokey, and some of them, if possible, a little more sedate or something. And she zeroed in on that one right away, and that was it. That was the extent of her art direction. It was like working me through the process of coming up with a good musical idea. Just trusted the actual artwork on my own.
So there was no, once you turned it in, it just ran.
Yeah, I'm trying to think, in terms of the covers, I don't think I've ever had any art direction after the initial approval, which is not the same for the interior stuff. That is a lot more nitpicked. And, for some reason, when I do an illustration that accompanies the fiction piece in an issue, that one gets really scrutinized for some reason. There's a lot of notes.
We'll come back to some more of the pieces in this book, but I want to jump back further to how your career started with Optic Nerve.
That doesn't look like my cover.
I don't think it is. I think it's a fan cover that someone made.
Okay.
I just really like it, and I want to see what you would think.
Yeah, I got it.
But you started drawing comics in high school, and you had a pretty unique experience for someone who started drawing comics really young, which is that you collected a pretty substantial readership very early. I mean, substantial by sort of the standards of the pre-internet era. You know, you were selling minis in different stores. By the 5th or 6th issue, it seemed like you were getting some response.
Yeah.
People were reading them and noticing it. And it seemed like this led to results that at the time were really satisfying and pleasing to you, and that you got picked up by Drawing Quarterly, and you got to have a book published of your early pieces, which was something that you had dreamed of for a long time, but it seems
No, that's not true. I didn't want the early stuff to be published in a book.
Not even at the time?
No.
And it's interesting, I mean, in the new collected copy of those minis, you talk about your mixed feelings about it, that you felt worried about having that stuff collected, but the very idea of having a book was so exciting that you
That's true.
left it to some extent.
Yeah, no, I'm probably more, I can act more jaded about it in hindsight or something. And obviously no one had a gun to my head and say, force me to publish this junk.
Right.
I mean, but now, I mean, however many years later, I really, it's hard for me to look at that stuff.
Leaving aside that embarrassment, do you feel like did it benefit your work as it was developing to have an audience for it that early, to be getting responses from people, to be getting letters, to be part of that world as quickly as you were?
Yeah, I mean, I got a lot of very positive and negative response from early on, and both were useful to me. And that still continues to this day for some reason. I feel like for such not that exciting subject matter, that the reaction to my work is often sort of pushed in a strange direction towards a little more positive or a little more negative than I'd expect. And like I said, that started really early, and I think it was important that I made this decision to not discount the negative and just sort of focus in on the little bit of praise that I was getting, and I've stuck with that. And so I think both extremes were useful to me. I was getting a lot of pretty brutal criticism for some reason, from other mini comics artists and whatnot. And then it was also nice to get some recognition from some of the other cartoonists who I'd sort of been looking up to. And that was extremely encouraging.
It was a nice mix of being encouraged to continue working, but not being mistaken about how great you actually are.
Yeah, no one was mistaken about that. I mean, it was. I was talking about this on an earlier panel, which is the days of being a young cartoonist and being able to just start off with a 12-page little Xerox thing. It's not as common now when people are thinking about, oh, my friend got a book. They have an agent. They got a book deal, and I got to do a 600-page graphic novel. I probably would have given up if that was my first ambition. It's so daunting.
And there's even a whole universe sort of a step below that, in that where young cartoonists have the ability to get their work out in front of a lot of people just simply by putting it on the web and working that world in a way that you did. And so it's just interesting to me to see how quickly cartoonists develop and evolve when they have that kind of feedback, that kind of instant feedback.
Yeah, I mean, it felt really instant to me when I was doing it, and that was totally, analog. It was like a P.O. box and postcards and all that, and it still felt really instant. But, I don't know how I feel now. You just put something up instantly and have people responding to it instantly. I mean, I know I got some crazy letters early on, but I feel like something about being able to just type it on the computer encourages that even more. The polarization is even more noticeable in terms of like, someone puts up like an okay sketch, it's like, magnificent, beautiful, you know, or, you know, someone just starts trashing you and it like starts this whole snowball effect of people really brutalizing you, you know. I don't know if I have the strength to step into that arena.
Why did you, from the start, you seemed very determined to reprint some of the meanest letters that you got in your letters column.
Yes.
Why, what was your impulse in doing that?
Because a lot of people said, that's the best part of your comment. It's like my favorite thing to read, and so I wanted to keep that going. And
but even before someone did that, you made the choice
Yeah.
at some point. Someone sent me this shitty letter.
yeah,
I am going to put it on the back page. I mean, is that like the equivalent of the modern day hate retweet? Like someone tweets something mean about someone else, and so you just retweet it if it's about you, just to show that you don't care.
It could be. I mean, you know, I have to like, it's all, everything related to like Optic Nerve and the comic book and everything is sort of like this tradition that I've been stuck with since I was like 16 years old. So it's hard to, I just sort of keep sticking with it. And I'm trying to think of.
You still have a P.O. box because you've always had a P.O. box.
Yeah, exactly. I'm trying to think of what my mindset was back then when I published those first ones. It might have been sort of being a preemptive strike. Like I showed that I can acknowledge this criticism, maybe deflect other criticism or something, but of course that didn't really work out.
Yeah, it probably turns into a recursive loop.
It does.
Like, this is the best way to get published on Optic
Exactly.
Nerve.
I mean, at this point, it's very clear. I can spot it a mile away when someone's like trying to get onto the letters page by being, you know, zany or something. I think also that it was partially me trying to manage this like premature career that was started. Like I really did not think I was ready to have my work published. I was really expecting to continue doing little black and white mini comics that would be in a few stores in Sacramento for a long time. I really was thinking about what job I was going to do when I got out of college and if that would give me enough time to draw comics on the side and everything. And so there was a part of me that was sort of, I mean, this was quite stupid of me, but I was sort of trying to argue against some of the what I thought was the over praise from some like, it was like too much of it. Was definitely, I was benefiting from more of like the time and the place, and I was like, comics were just starting to enter some new phase of respectability, and there were a lot of nice cartoonists who were older than me who were sort of eager to spot upcoming talent and were very kind towards me. But in some ways, that whole experience kind of has its downside too, because then someone comes to it with all those expectations and says like, well, no, this is actually like okay for like a 16-year-old kid. Like it's a little Xerox pamphlet, but like let's not overdo it.
When you were like a junior in high school, what was the job you thought you would have that would allow you time to cartoon on the side?
Well, when I was in high school and college, I had a lot of jobs that were completely unrelated to anything of my interest. It wasn't like I was like working at an art store or working in a bookstore or anything like that. It was just like kind of like the way I felt going to college, where it's like I was just going to make it almost as different as possible from my interest in becoming a cartoonist, so that it wasn't competing in some way for my attention. So I worked as a waiter, I worked as a prep cook, I worked for a long time. Not a long time, but for a couple of summers I drove a van for a Xerox company. But it was just stuff that was like, I could sort of be thinking about what I was going to do when I got home, rather than having to focus on the actual work that much.
And one of the introductions to what I'm holding up is the collected early Optic Nerve, one of the pamphlets from it. You talk about how in those early issues of Optic Nerve, you sort of started to find your fictional voice, and one of the things that you found was that it was really useful to take a story from your life, something that had happened to you or to someone you knew, and to alter it slightly to just, as you say, to make the stand-in character for you behave in an even more creepy or off-putting manner than you actually did in real life. You did, yes. And I think that's an excellent definition in general of the way fiction often works for people, for writers. But I'm curious as to what about those stories and what about your own fictional instincts made you feel like that was the direction you wanted to go. You seem very aggressively opposed, especially in this early work, to idealizing any aspect of what you were living through at that time.
I mean, I was definitely following in the tradition of the cartoonists who had come before me, like alternative or underground cartoonists. And I mean, historically, there's just sort of an emphasis on, like Robert Crumb is always approaching things from like the underdog's point of view, and sort of, like he had that weirdo cover of like the weird sensitive guy sniffing a flower in the front, and the background's like the really handsome yuppies jogging along. So I think I was just that whole attitude that I was getting from these comics really meshed with just sort of how I was feeling as a teenager, of course. And I think I was also just sort of really at that point disinterested and kind of put off by the more mainstream superhero comics. I don't know. It's just sort of an interest that I have to this point, to this day. Like it's like I'm always more attracted to someone who tells sort of an embarrassing anecdote about themselves rather than one that ends up like. And so I won, like some sort of self-aggrandizing kind of anecdote. And I don't know, and I think it was there's all kinds of weird psychology going on. Like I don't really sit down and think I'm going to take this element from my real life and transform it in this way and end up with this result that I'm focusing on. It just sort of happens unconsciously, and a lot of it is sort of like some sort of acknowledgement of my own flaws through these fictional stories. It's not really absolving me of those, but it's acknowledging them.
What has been your working relationship with Chris at Drawn Quarterly? I mean, you've worked with him for many years. You have very, very gracious things to say about him in various introductions that you've written to the books. And so besides your editors at the New Yorker, that seems like the longest running editorial relationship that you've had in your career. What is it like working with him? I mean, how often do you communicate? How active of an editor is he?
Well, with me, he's not an editor. He's a publisher. He's like an enabler. Like he kind of like helps me out. Makes these things tangible. But he's never been an editor to me, and I think he's sort of uncomfortable with that role in general. But yeah, I mean, he's basically just been an incredible friend and supporter. And I think there are some people now who are sort of uncomfortable with that sort of working relationship where they want an editor, they want to show the script to the editor and have it workshop, and they collaborate and everything. But I have really enjoyed the way we work together. I'm sure, I think that's just kind of the way it's sort of set in stone at this point. But yeah, Chris is a kind of a one-of-a-kind guy. I think he's got he's a cartoonist and an artist himself, and I think he's one of these cases where he wasn't like a businessman who thought like, let me capitalize on comics or something. It was more like the reverse, where he was like this artist and a guy who loved other people's art and just sort of stumbled into this position of being kind of a businessman.
Did you know, were there artists already at Drawn Quarterly when they approached you whose work you already were excited about, that you were happy about joining?
Yeah, I mean, and they didn't just approach me out of the blue. I was sort of pestering them a little bit because that was the company that I wanted to work for, and mainly because of those artists that they had, the first group of artists that they published, and it was Seth and Chester Brown and Joe Matt and Julie Doucet. And I was extremely influenced by all the work that they were doing at the time, and there was just a part of me that just really wanted to be part of that lineup. It was a fantasy of mine.
They reprinted in the same Optic Nerve collection as the first letter that Chris wrote to you that McCann wrote, telling you basically, keep it up, good work. I like your fictional stories more than your autobiographical ones. And he in his introduction talks about sort of feeling slightly embarrassed to look at that letter now. That this is what I pulled off to email Adrian or to mail to Adrian.
There's a lot of embarrassment inside that box. I mean, he didn't want me to print that letter. I can't stand. I like just seeing that photo. Yeah, that's hard for me to deal with.
I didn't put it in the PowerPoint.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, just everything was just a lot more casual. This kind of comics that I consider myself a part of has become a lot more of a business and an industry in the 15 years since I started doing it. And my initial contact and negotiations with John Quarterly were extremely informal.
You've collected a lot of your later Optic Nerve stories in a couple of books, including Summer Blonde, which I have up here. And there's one particular story in this book that has really stuck with me for a long time, and I think probably a lot of people out in the crowd know it well, which is Bomb Scare, the last story in Summer Blonde, which is about several high school kids, and it's about an awkward friendship between a boy named Scotty and his coworker Cammy, who works at a restaurant with him. But then there's another character in that story named Alex, who is really fascinating to me and one of your most fascinating characters. He's sort of an artsy, ahead of his time, semi-gothy kid who's clearly unhappy with his high school experience, but he's wise beyond his years in a lot of ways, despite keeping a stun gun or bragging about having a stun gun in his jacket, which eventually gets him kicked out. But that note that he writes to Scotty when Scotty basically ditches him, when Scotty starts telling lies about him, was really striking to me. Alex writes to him, I'm not exactly sure what you've been telling people, but we both know what happened that night. Eventually you'll look back on all this with embarrassment and guilt, but for now, enjoy yourself, he says. And that, I mean, that's a really, as a reader even, that's a fairly mortifying moment, because you realize what a terrible choice Scotty has made to dump this obviously smart, screwed up kid who probably would lead to a much more interesting life for him. Did you, when you were in high school, did you have like an Alex in your life? Not someone who you necessarily had a falling out with, but was there someone in your high school experience who served the role of sort of showing you that there was a world outside of what you were living, or did you have to sort of make that up for yourself?
I'm trying to think. That's not like a extremely autobiographical story. You know, there were people I knew who were similar to some of those characters, but I don't know. I think actually it might have been maybe I had more of the opposite experience. That at that period of my life, I was sort of looking for like-minded peers, and the place where I was living and the school that I was going to was not really readily available to me. I just feel like the idea of someone publicly being interested in comic books at the high school that I was at that time was kind of unthinkable. Whereas now it's just taken for granted. It's okay, you know. But no, I didn't have that experience of having like friends who also read comics or were. There were definitely some people that I knew who shared that interest, but it wasn't that's the same. It wasn't the friendship that's depicted.
Shortcomings came out just a couple of years ago, and the stories that are part of it, the Optic Nerve issues that are part of it, came about around the same time you moved from the Bay Area to Brooklyn.
Right.
And it's a move that Ben specifically makes fun of in the book. The main character in this book talks about how annoying it is to him that everyone in the Bay Area has this total hard-on for Brooklyn. People can't stop moving to Brooklyn. Other than your barber, what do you miss about the Bay Area? What do you miss about living
the
there?
weather. That's my wife is sick of hearing about it at this point. But yeah, I mean, I spent 15 years living in Berkeley. I think to go from that to New York, I just wasn't. It was I wasn't used to that. I'm trying to think. It's people ask me about this a lot. I think because I put a lot of that stuff into the book, but to me, it's not easy to answer because I moved to New York to basically get married and be with my wife, and now we have a kid together, and so New York is all kind of inextricably tied in with my family and being married and the joy that I get from being with my kid, and so it's not. And in contrast, I think of my life in Berkeley as being kind of a lonely, post-college kind of life, and so it's not a fair comparison of the two locales.
Was there a local comics community in Berkeley that you felt part of? Were there peers there who you were working with and drawing with?
That was a huge kind of lucky break in my life, which is that when I moved to Berkeley, I just at random got an apartment on a street in Berkeley, and then happened to be living 1 block away in this direction from a cartoonist named Richard Sala, and a block in this other direction from Dan Clowes, all on the same street. And we just eventually got to know each other and became really good friends. And those years of hanging out with those guys on a regular basis was for me kind of a very informal version, I think, of what some people get when they go to art school or comic book college or something like that, where it's just being kind of exposed to a lot of stuff that I wasn't aware of, and being able to learn from professionals who have years of experience. So that was my main cartoonist community in the Bay Area. And there were a lot of other people who also were doing comics around that same time that I would see. There was a comic store called Comic Relief. That was kind of a hub of activities. And it had a big impact on me.
Brooklyn has a pretty vibrant comics community now. Are you nesting enough that you don't interact with it that much?
Pretty much. I mean, I don't have time to go out and do karaoke with other cartoonists or anything like that. Usually trying to get work done once my daughter goes to sleep. But I mean, it's nice. I mean, even if I'm not directly involved with it, it is nice to have the sort of subliminal sense that you're living in a part of the world where people are excited about comics and are striving to do great work. And so I'm aware of it, but not deeply involved.
Mm-hmm. After Shortcomings came Scenes From an Impending Marriage, which was published by Drawn and Quarterly a couple of years after your actual wedding.
Yeah. When my daughter was born and I needed to make money.
Sure. One thing I really enjoy about this book is sort of the tension between the cuteness of the drawings, which are often, either intentionally gag-like or Peanuts-like, and your willingness your eagerness, in fact, to make yourself look bad in them, in a style that is familiar to readers of yours. But nevertheless, I do feel like there's sort of an underlying romanticism to this whole project by definition, because we know that it has a happy ending as we're reading it. Right. Well, we know that at least the book itself has a happy ending, even if we cannot project into the future. Did you find it hard at all to work in this mode? Did you ever find yourself having instincts, well, maybe I should fictionalize this and make this naughtier or weirder, or were you just straight up for the cash? That was it?
No, it wasn't. The book wasn't created for the cash. It was republished with that in mind, maybe to a degree, but it was created for pretty pure reasons, which was to have a gift to give to our friends and family at our wedding. Mm-hmm. So there was a really kind of cheaper, handmade version of this book that we gave out as a little gift at the actual wedding. So by definition, the tone and the subject matter and everything was very skewed towards the pleasant side of things.
Right. You were unwilling to spoil your wedding.
Yeah, no, it's not a tell-all by any means.
Have any of those ended up on eBay yet? Are people?
There was a few, and it was a little bit awkward, and that was that was another reason. There was a part of me that wanted to just like subvert all that and not have it be something that the guy who played an instrument at our wedding was trying to sell on.
Right. The most recent issue of Optic Nerve has two stories in it, two long stories, one called Hortisculture and one called Amber Sweet. And the first one is written, its structure is essentially a series of daily and Sunday newspaper strips.
And then another fake cover too.
Yes, that is indeed another fake. I mean, those are actual panels from Amber Sweet, and that's the overlay that Drawn and Quarterly did.
Right, yeah.
That is weirdly what Drawn and Quarterly has up on their website.
Yeah.
And then the Amber Sweet is written essentially as like a cinematic monologue almost, utilizing voiceover and flashback in a way that is a little different from a lot of work that I've seen of yours. Have you considered specifically storytelling further in either of those media? Have you thought, I mean, leaving aside the totally economic unfeasibility of doing a daily strip, would you be interested ever in working in that form? Have you written screenplays? Have you thought about entering that world either? Sort of the two different worlds that the two stories in Optic Nerve explore.
No, I would not ever want to pursue doing a daily strip. I could never keep up with that. I like the form though. I mean, I like reading these reprint books of old comic strips, and that was what inspired that way of telling that story, of course. But no, I couldn't do it for real. I couldn't do it professionally. And the cinematic stuff, I mean, I think anyone who has comics that are being published at this point, there's always going to be the occasional weird email or phone call coming from LA or something like that you just sort of have to
scout route, and it's always scout route.
you can't, I mean, I guess you could just completely ignore it, but I think there's probably a lot of, especially the young cartoonists now who have to sort of manage, like, how seriously do I take this, and do I chase it, and do I really pursue it, or do I just disregard it and focus on the comics? So I think it's sort of this, like, no one wants to really talk about it, but I think it is this weird thing that's affecting a lot of cartoonists at this point.
But you have no interest?
No, I'm not opposed to it, but I don't want it bad enough that I'm gonna like put comics on hold and just pursue it. I have a hard time pursuing things.
What happened with Benjamin Godfrey, the letter writer who wanted $100 for you for copyright infringement?
I shouldn't talk about it. I shouldn't talk about it. I feel bad even about the letters being in the comics, so I should plead the fifth.
All right. So then let's go back to your New Yorker drawings. This is the first drawing that you ever did for them. It's the band Luscious Jackson from 1999.
That places it in that time.
It does, yes. I bought that album on CD.
Okay.
So you mentioned briefly in the book how unlikely you feel the story of how you started drawing for the New Yorker is.
Oh, yeah.
Tell the people out here how that happened.
Well, it's unlikely for a lot of reasons, but in hindsight, when I had to think about it for putting this book together, I realized that like almost every element of the story is completely out of date or anachronistic or obsolete or whatever. Starting with the fact that I was living in Berkeley at the time, and that to find out like who I should send my samples to, I went to an actual bookstore, which is now closed down, and just looked up, found in an illustration manual some New Yorker things, and found the name Chris Curry, and then physically made up a package of tear sheets and drawings and things like that, and carried it with me on an airplane to New York. And when I got to New York, I looked up in the phone book the address for the New Yorker offices and walked over there. And
was this pre-4 Times Square? Was this
yeah.
in the old office?
Yeah. And it was also pre-security. Like I just kind of walked into the building,
right,
and went up the stairs and opened the New Yorker offices door.
Their long-time receptionist.
Oh yeah,
I worked there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Very intimidating to me. he's still there, and I remember just asking, like, can I leave my portfolio here? And he looked at me and he said, you can. I mean, that's kind of how he is.
Yeah. He's been doing that to artists for 20, 30 years.
I mean, everyone who's ever been published in the book has a story about Stanley. And so I just kind of, okay, I just like threw this little envelope on the counter and like walked out.
Stanley, for those who don't know, is a New Yorker legend who has been there for many years. He's just a lovely New York character who, when Condé Nast layoffs forced the elimination of his position, was just hired back by David Remnick as an editor without a portfolio, basically. He doesn't actually edit anything,
right.
But he's just a guy they want around.
Yeah, he almost intimidated me out of even working for the magazine because I was so, I thought, like, I got this far, but now I've...
So then did Chris send you a telegram?
Yeah. Pony Express arrived at my door. Yeah, and then I just went back to Berkeley and forgot about it, and then eventually, yeah, Chris. Well, it is kind of outdated. She called me up on the phone. It's all pre-internet. So and just and it was also just unlikely that she would take the time to look at something that was just dropped off on the receptionist's desk and look it over and get in touch with me. So there's a lot of lucky breaks.
Did you get the impression that Chris was familiar at all with your comics work?
I don't think so. No, I don't think so. I did get that impression. She's familiar with comics and prodigious, but I don't think I had any there's any recognition of that.
Here's a sketchbook from much more recently, from 2008.
That's just what they call it.
Right. So the wide open space up at the top suggests that it was a cover concept. Was that at one point pitched as a cover?
No, it wasn't actually, but there have been things like that where I did it for an interior thing, and there was actually one that went the other way. I did it for an interior page of the magazine, and it didn't get used, and then I submitted it as a cover.
Which one was that?
The Outdoor Cinema, the Brooklyn.
Oh, right. I don't have a slide of that, but yeah.
And this one, like, there's a lot of these images that I went to the New Yorker that are really me being like a jerky California guy complaining about things about New York that he doesn't like. So this was like drawn during the summer, and to me it was really bizarre that there could be like, thunderous pouring rain, and you're like sweating, and the humidity is like unbearable, and you're trapped in this urine-scented subway steps. When it was published, like all these like lifelong New Yorkers, like, that is the most beautiful image. You really capture what I love about this city. And that's happened a lot of times with my New Yorker images, and of course I'm smart enough to just be like, oh, I'm glad you liked it.
That is a very New York attitude that New Yorkers are unwilling or unable to imagine that anyone could ever have a problem with their city.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, other than the things that are already complaining about.
Yeah.
Here's another cover image of yours, which
this also got misunderstood.
So talk about that a little bit.
This is just based on where I was living at the time. I was living in an apartment upstairs from a little used bookstore, and so it's just, to me, it was just the idea of the guilt you might feel as you're receiving an Amazon package and you see the poor bookstore owner opening up shop and glaring at you. And I actually, I guess I can say this, that I've never ordered a book from Amazon. Like, I've resisted it, and I still do to this day. And so for me, this was, of course I order plenty of other things from Amazon, but just, not that it makes any difference in the world other than for my own conscience, I don't order books from Amazon. And so this was sort of my, just a little statement about that. And of course, in reality, my sympathy lies with the bookstore owner. And I did hear from a few different booksellers who said that they cut it out and put it in the window of their shop and everything. And then eventually I also found out that someone at the offices of Amazon ordered 10 copies of that print and hung it up, and I think it was like a victory lap or something. Right?
Like a linebacker standing over the guy he knocked out.
Yeah, in your face.
Yeah. So, I do like just looking at this as compared to this cover, in which in each case, books are used as a way of making a connection, but they're essentially the functionally opposite connections. Like in this case, it's these people will never see each other again, but will forever think fondly of each other. And then in this case, they'll have to see each other every day with the knowledge of what they just witnessed hovering above their heads.
Yeah, this is to me the most, the reaction to that has been the most confounding, because there was that sort of two interpretations of it. And I've mentioned this in the book, but I've heard from probably at least 10 different bookstore owners saying like, oh, I couldn't believe you drew my store on the cover of the New Yorker. And I mean, these are people who have stores like in California,
right,
that I've never been to, or stores in New York that look nothing like that.
I bet they have the word book on them.
They might have the word book, they might have some glass.
Yeah.
I don't know, it's been strange to me. You never know what life something's gonna have beyond once you send it in.
This is one of your strips from the New Yorker. You talk about in the...
I feel like I'm eating a dead horse here with all this book. It's all this,
that's true. This is also anti-e-commerce.
Is this not? Yeah.
This is the Kindle one, yes. But I'm interested in, you talk about how you felt as pleased to get comic strips in the New Yorker, really, as you were to get covers in the New Yorker, that was as big a deal for you. And these New Yorker strips really have been mostly autobiographical, or at least pseudo-autobiographical. Have you ever pitched them fiction?
I haven't yet, because I'm a little intimidated by that idea. I mean, they at least to my mind, they're publishing some of the highest level fiction right now, and the idea of trying to jump up on those stages is a little absurd. Whereas these one-page strips sort of exist somewhere, probably closer to like the gag cartoons that they publish, and are more lighthearted and story-based. So I feel a little more comfortable with that. I mean, I feel like somebody should do it. I mean, like Dan Clowes had a 2 or 3 page story in there when Wilson came out, but that still wasn't like a serious fiction piece.
Right. I assume it was not edited by the fiction department.
No, I don't know, but it didn't seem like it wasn't definitely wasn't in place of that week's fiction.
Right.
Yeah. I'd love to see someone do that though. That would be a breakthrough.
And so it's true that your illustrations for fiction get heavily worked on?
Yeah, for some reason, I don't know why, but those do seem to get the most revisions.
Interesting.
Yeah. See gears turning in your head for some.
Or no, I'm just saying, like, it seems, my hunch is that if that's happening, it's because of notes coming from the fiction editor, coming from Albert Treatment, and I assume that
might be.
That if she has enough if she's interested enough in the visuals of what's going on in those stories, it certainly seems like she'd be open to getting a pitch from you to do fiction for the New Yorker.
Well, there's also a lot more, it sort of makes sense in that if you're drawing like a picture of Luscious Jackson for performing, you kind of just have to draw that band.
Right.
There's a few permutations of composition or something like that.
Right.
But the fiction thing is always tricky in terms of like, and they're smart about this, you don't want to just simply reiterate the first sentence of the prose or really hammer away at something that's kind of ambiguous within the narrative. I can see why there has to be a lot of back and forth.
Thank you, Adrian.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.